Hi everyone, my name is Paul Danta. Thank you for joining. Looks like we have a number of people who have joined the webinar, so thank you so much. We're going to try and keep things on schedule. We know everyone's time is precious, so we're going to kick off. Way we're going to run this presentation today is to give you really a high-level overview of journal publishing, look at some of the approaches we've taken, look at some of the things you may want to consider as you're perhaps thinking about taking your journal to market. And we're going to do that just with a very high level overview. We're going to give you some examples. We're not going to focus too much on press run and the product, but we will obviously address some things that we've learned and approach it in that way. Feel free to put your questions to us using the webinar interface, and we'll try and address those at the end. But let's kick off and take a look at really the way that we're going to tackle this subject today. So we're just going to give you a brief overview of journals on tablet devices, just to understand exactly what's being done today and how approaches have been made by existing journals. We're going to look at the content challenge. We're going to look at things like what are the workflow considerations, how does your content live today, and what's the best way to integrate that with any kind of solution that you may adopt. We're going to look at additional things around content and how you may want to augment it so that you have additional assets available for your tablet publication. We're also going to look at the production process. We're going to focus on manual production and automated production. What are the pros and cons of both and what you need to have in place? And we're also going to look at some additional considerations for things that you may need to think about to just make it a well-rounded product and give you the kind of feedback that you're going to need for you to judge and measure whether or not it's been a success. We'll tail that off with a few questions and answers, and anything that we don't get to today, we'll follow up with anyone. So feel free to raise as many questions as you want, and then we'll address those either live during the webinar or we'll follow up with you later. So just kicking off in terms of the introduction, here are a few of the publications that we've taken to market for our journal customers. Typically, the way that we've looked at the process is to either have a full automated solution put in place, or we will look at a hybrid solution where a lot of the articles are rendered in an automated way, but there are some more manual elements to the publication, like, for instance, the front cover on the British Medical Journal. That's produced in InDesign and integrated into the system. But generally, this market's obviously taking off. There are a lot of medical professionals that are carrying iPads and want to be able to access journals as and when they have time to sit down and read the content. The way that we've approached it and the way generally it has been approached in the market is that the application that is effectively the reader can download journals and make them available offline. It's a really smart approach because you never know when connectivity will happen. Doctors may be downloading journal content offline, or sorry, at home even, and then viewing it when they don't have a connection at the hospital. And let's not forget that obviously we're focused on medical journals. That's where our broadest experience is today. But a lot of what we're talking about affects journals across the board. So that could be professional and trade journals and beyond. So a lot of the principles we'll talk about today may be discussing medical in general, but really we can use these approaches across the whole scientific, technical, and medical journal market. So a couple of approaches to consider when you are thinking about developing something. The first one really is, should you be creating something from scratch with a custom application, or should you be using a third-party vendor that may have a product that can help you get to market a little faster? There are pros and cons to both. Obviously, a custom app is going to give you the most flexibility, but in our experience, we've noticed that there's a new skill set that's required really in managing the development of a custom app, and there are some consequences in terms of the the way that you could support broader devices as new devices come out. That may be smaller iPad, maybe Android devices, maybe Windows 8, and wanting to maybe take a custom app to market may involve some thought in the long run around, are you willing to maintain that as you move forward and go to support additional devices. Product support, obviously there's sometimes some concessions that you need to make around some of the features that you'd love to have in your journal reader versus what is supported by the product out of the box. And really my advice is to think about what are the fundamental requirements of what you're trying to achieve with the reader, and then just make sure you can tick those off against any vendors that you look at. So typical examples we come up against with customers that we work with are things like, does the reader support real text so it's searchable? Because obviously for a lot of the content that you're presenting in a journal, people are going to want to come back to it later, and they're going to want to be able to find things in a very easy way. I mentioned offline previously, that's usually a critical requirement. Things like being able to resize fonts, understanding what the issue sizes are for that downloadable content to make sure it's usable. Integration of things like social and sharing and annotations can be critical depending on the application. So those are sort of some examples, but I'm sure you'd be able to come up with a whole host more. So definitely think about that. Think about the implications of both, and hopefully you'll find something that's going to work for you. An additional thing to think about as you're drawing up your list of requirements is, what are the features are you going to need that is more relevant to a tablet device? This may be your first foray into applications on iPhone, iPad, or Android and beyond. And of course, if you've even coming from this from a digital point of view, maybe you've managed web rollouts and things in the past. It's a slightly different ball game when you're looking at tablet devices because of the way the touchscreen interface works. So there are certain things that I think we probably would all agree that end users, readers would expect from a tablet interface when they are using a product, a reader product for a journal. And here are a list of a few things that you may want to consider. And it's really important to do that because, like any product you launch, you're representing your brand, but also you're meeting the expectations of your readership. And if you simply just go to market with something that's very plain, specifically on a tablet device where expectations are quite high around the touchscreen interface. So for example, you were to launch just something that's very much PDF-like, you may find that there is some feedback that is critical of that approach. And of course, the way that apps are deployed via an app store gives users opportunities to express those thoughts quite publicly. So it's something to bear in mind. You definitely want to embrace the platform and do the best job you possibly can, given your time and budget, as you approach this. I briefly touched on market segmentation previously around how you may want to support different devices. This is just a slide just to demonstrate the challenges that you may face, whether you go with a product company or if you go down the custom app route and decide to hire a coder yourself. Right now, Apple is still relatively dominant in the space. Android is definitely catching up. You're looking at Windows 8 at the time of this presentation, just starting to emerge with plans for release shortly, and who knows how the shape of the market will evolve around those different platforms. And when you look at the platforms and you look at the manufacturers and the hardware, and even how those apps are distributed through the different app stores and then across different countries in the world, hopefully you'll get a feel for the challenge of the fragmentation in the market and the segmentation within the market, and it's something to definitely bear in mind. Of course, all this represents opportunity as well. You may have a journal that only publishes in one country right now because it's print, and you have some logistic challenges or so on, and this is opportunity because once you've built an app, it's relatively straightforward to publish that app into different territories, and that could represent a new revenue source for you, or at least the ability to generate new subscribers. So something to bear in mind. And what we've done here with this presentation is at the end of every section, I've just outlined some key questions you may want to take away, hopefully to aid you in your quest to develop your journal to tablet devices. So some questions, I guess, from this introduction section. What content are you looking to provide? Is a key one I haven't touched on yet, just simply because it's an important question in that do you want to take the journal to market, or do you want to take some other information that you may want to share with your readership to market? And it's kind of a key question because understanding the actual content you're trying to do may evolve your strategy in terms of the device type that you want to take that content to market. A good example is you may have a journal, but you may also on your website provide a jobs listing service to your membership. And depending on what you want to do, you may want to just produce the journal that's accessible via a tablet and job listings via phone. So just really kind of get to grips with what is it you're trying to achieve with your mobile strategy, and understand which content you're looking to take to market is a really simple question you probably want to address initially. What's the best format for the content? Are you, again, once you've decided which content that is, are you going to take it to phones? Are you going to take it to tablet? And then critically, what is the preference and priority for the devices that you want to reach first? So is that iPad? Is it Android? Is it Windows 8? A lot of that may be driven from your readership. You may want to even, quick tip here, is look at your weblogs and see what kind of devices are actually accessing your content online, and then maybe base your strategy on that. You may have a lot of Android users that are trying to get article content from your website right now. So that could be something that could drive things. And then what are your core requirements that we touched on? So, what is the reading experience like, and so on? Do you need real text? Additionally, you may want to think about things like what is the goal for your tablet initiative? So think about some key metrics that you're going to measure your success on. So is that things like increasing subscribers, retaining membership, number of downloads, those kinds of things relate to the metrics you may want to measure. And then think about the thresholds if you have a product roadmap for your tablet journal. So if you want to launch, say, on iPad first, what are the thresholds in terms of download numbers before you launch on Android? Those kinds of things will really help you start to focus on what's version 1 going to look like, and then what's going to happen beyond. Let's look at some of the content challenges you're going to face. And to do that, we're going to take a very simple look at how journals are generally structured. This is very overly simplistic, but you can apply your experience to this, and hopefully it'll help you think a little bit about how your content is structured and maybe the best way for you to take that to market. So broadly speaking, obviously authors contribute content, and that usually goes into some kind of content management system. That could be something really sophisticated, a big digital content management system, or it could be something as simple as a file system where they upload Word documents, and an editor will look at them and approve them, make changes, or submit them back to the author for revision. In addition, into that CMS, assets, things that are going to support articles could be added. They may be just as simple as photographs, or you may even have things like video that gets produced by an author, or audio that gets produced if they are making recordings when they're producing content. Once all those things are assembled from a print point of view, those things will then go to a designer who will lay it out in your journal format, and usually in a system like InDesign. We're using InDesign as an example here, and then that will go out to print. And that's a very sort of basic print strategy. Quite often we find that bolted onto that can be a digital or web strategy, and if you're using a sort of digital content management system, that's usually straightforward. So there's a way to repurpose that content in a way that makes it look good on web and maybe even mobile devices as well. And that's a good way to approach it. If you're not using a digital content management system, it's a more manual file-based system. What we often see is that the process for print follows its natural course, and at the end of the process, a PDF of the print version will be sent to some third-party vendor, and often that's converted into a well-structured XML markup version of the print document. So they'll extract all the text, they'll mark it up, They'll sometimes even pull the assets out of the PDF and then make those available. And then that markup will drive the website as well. So the important thing to take away here is that if there's a digital content management system that can be automated to drive content to the web, and sometimes we'll see a system whereby content from print is extracted and then XML is provided to web. It's important to think about these things, because as you go ahead and think about how that content is going to go to the tablet device or the system you're using to format things for the tablet device, you're going to really have to understand where you can integrate with that content. So, really getting a good understanding of where the content lives today. Is it a content management system? Are you using InDesign? Do you, or otherwise, do you have some kind of conversion that happens? The content that comes out of the content management system or from the conversion, is that a standard format of XML? Is it like NLM XML, for instance? Something else to bear in mind, do you need additional rights or approvals in terms of digital distribution? So if you're, for instance, licensing some photographs, do you need a different license for digital versus print? You may already have considered that for web. And those things are definitely takeaways when you first sit down and do some initial assessments of where your content lives. And the same really applies to when you're augmenting your content. So if your typical workflow is just to produce the print edition, and maybe even if that includes producing a web edition, you may find that when you think about the kind of content you want to produce for the tablet edition, and when you think about the types of interactivity that you may want to add to the tablet edition, there may be cause to think about, well, we're going to need some additional multimedia assets to augment that content to make it a little bit more interesting for the tablet device. Very simple example is if we're on a printed page or even on a web document, you may have a single image and text flowing around it. Producing that for a tablet you may say, well, we can actually use a slideshow rather than a single image. So if I tap on that image, I can actually swipe through and see more pictures that are associated to the article. And of course, that means there's a production process that needs to be added. So it's very critical that you think about that, because as you decide on the extent to which you want to augment the content on your tablet device, and the requirement for augmenting the content often in terms of making it a really interesting user experience on the touchscreen is key, because it will have implications to your production process. So you may want to do an assessment of what assets are available today. Maybe you're not even really doing anything to web other than content that's coming out of a conversion from your PDF document to XML, and then that's getting rendered as very basic article content on your website. And in such an instance, what are the additional assets that are available? Maybe there is video available somewhere, and maybe there is audio, maybe there's podcasts that are getting produced that you may want to all bundle together. So you really need to do kind of an audit of those assets to understand what you can do. So as you start to plan around it, it'll make sense and you'll understand any production implications. Again, approvals may be required, and then I've added another point to this area around Apple iOS developer account. It's more applicable to Apple than some of the other accounts. I'm asking this question now because around this point in your thinking as you go to develop your journal, you may want to start this process. So as you're thinking about content and where it all lives, in parallel, you may want to think, do I have an Apple developer account? Because it can take a few weeks just to get all the things together and set up and submitted and then approved for your Apple ID. It's a little less complicated for Android because there isn't the App Store requirements that Apple has, but it's fine. It's pretty straightforward. Most organizations either have them or at this point is a good time to start thinking about that, so you can have everything in place when you have your app together. Let's talk about production quickly, because that's the next process. Once you've got all your content decided on, you understand if you've got any additional augmented content that you want to add to articles. How do you go about actually pulling it all together and producing something that looks great on tablet devices? Well, I'm going to describe to you sort of two processes that you can use. These could apply to both product solutions or even a custom solution that you may be putting together yourself. But broadly, they follow two principles. One of them is manual, which is typically using some kind of page layout software, maybe Quark Express or Adobe InDesign. And pages are laid out manually by a designer, just like they are for print, but they're done in a way that means they have extra interactivity added to them. There are a number of tools out there. PressRun is one of them that can do this. The second one is more of an automated process. So if your content lives in XML somewhere on your system, can you send that XML to a system, have it automatically processed, and all of the content flowed into some templates, and then produce your issue in a much more automated fashion without manual page layout? There are pros and cons to both. Just speaking broadly, from a manual point of view, if you really want to have pixel perfect control over every page and every orientation, that can definitely be a way to solve it. Automation tends to do a bit more of a templatized kind of web-based approach to laying out pages, and that can also work too. Of course, the manual process is much more process intensive. It's going to have a lot more production cost associated with it. Automation, of course, is going to is just not going to take any time whatsoever once it's set up. But there can be more costs up front in order to get that process in place. So something to bear in mind. And let's just describe how both those processes work end to end, so you get a good feel for it. So from a manual production point of view, again, looking at our very basic flow of how your journal may be put together, authors are contributing content to the content management system. Assets are also put in there. That goes out to InDesign, for example, and then your print journal is laid out, and then it's sent to print. Now, very often, if you're using a manual process, what will happen towards the end of the InDesign to print process, usually when there are no text changes required, and you're pretty much set. It's just some final editing and some final layout, and usually the gathering of a few additional assets like images. That is sent to either another team or another designer, or the same designer will start laying out the same content for a tablet device. And I don't want to go into too much depth around what is involved in that, but at a very basic level, think about how the tablet device may have a different aspect ratio. So you may need to do some adjustments on the page. You will often want to lay out the document in two orientations. So the designer will have to sit there and relay everything out also in landscape, so that the reader can flip the device and read in a way of their choosing. And just by way of an example around that, from our research, with users that use our system, is actually a much higher percentage of users use landscape mode than portrait. So obviously traditional print layouts are portraits, and you may have to consider that. And so there's effort involved for the designer to do those things. Once the designer's laid everything out, quite often that will go into some system. We're using PressRun as an example here, so those files will get submitted and compiled. They'll get pushed out to a tablet somehow, so there'll be a reader app that will allow an issue to be downloaded into it, and then the consumer will be able to access that issue once it's gone live and been published. In addition, there's usually some QA processes just to make sure everything's in place, and you may also be adding advertising in, whether that's web-based advertising, if that's a way you plan on monetizing some of this content, or it can be just versions of print ads that you're using in your print journal also. So that all comes together and then is effectively pushed to the consumer, and then they can go ahead and read it. Now, we'll compare that to automation. So again, the same process, it goes to print. Then in this instance, what we're looking at here is we're assuming that you're using a digital content management system, and this could apply if your print PDF documents are being translated into some form of XML also. But in this example, what we're going to say is that you could work with the XML that's produced out of the content management system. Very often, NLM is in medical journals, for instance, a standard that's used. We've worked with many other standards, and however you're planning on producing your app, there's a integration that you would do, and using a standard XML format is a good way to do it. So what we generally plan for with our customers is that they would package up everything that needs to go into a particular issue and then zip it and send it to us. And that's an automated process that happens. So their content management system would be programmed to take typically an XML document for every article that's within an issue. It would also create some kind of table of contents manifest file, and would also package any of the assets that are referenced within the document to all be pulled together, and then that one package is sent to our system for it to effectively render the issue automatically. Now, I said I wasn't going to talk about products, so I'm not going to. What I'm going to say is that that process is kind of a good best practice for any automated system. If you were building a custom app, let's take the extreme example, that would still be a really good process to have in place, such that the custom app somehow would receive all of that content packaged in some way from your content management system. It means that you're not duplicating any effort. You still have one central place where everything lives. There's no risk of text changes or any problems with that. Everything will still be approved. It's just packaged into one little bundle. Then your app, however you decide to produce it, can unzip that package of content and then make it look good on the device. In addition, on the right-hand side of this slide, you'll see there's a cover page and designer. This is what I was hinting at the beginning of the presentation. Journals like the BMJ, who use our platform, will also submit a artwork. They do it in InDesign. It's a cover page that can contain links and other content that can be tappable, or it could even include audio or video and all those kinds of things. And that document is also submitted to the CMS and packaged up in the zip file. And that way you're able to blend sort of the XML article content with a cover page that maybe is more stylized and designed. It's kind of a best of both worlds scenario. Once that package is sent, I'll describe what we do with it, and it could, at a very high level, and it could apply to any approach that you decide to take. What we do is we take all the article content, we flow it into templates. We're effectively using HTML5 as a core technology, and those templates are rendering that content in both portrait and landscape. What we actually do is not only render it in those things, in those orientations, but we render it in those orientations for every font size that you want to make available for your reader, which is obviously a good thing to do. Going back to the requirements comment earlier on in the presentation, we do some things just to make sure there are no orphans and so on, so that everything looks good. Once the article has been flowed, it is then all packaged up on our system into an issue, which is available to download to the tablet. There are some things just briefly that we do around HTML5 to make it render really well on the device. So we're not suggesting, and I don't think anybody is, that all you need to really do is take HTML5 from your content management system and make that available in an app with a kind of app wrapper around it. That was done early on in the app days, and it really doesn't present the user with a very native device experience, and a lot of people shy away from that because it doesn't offer a particularly enjoyable user experience. We're using it because we think that it's a good fundamental description of content, but we do some things to it to make it render natively within the application in a very efficient way, so it feels very native. And that's just a side note and something you may want to consider however you approach your automated process. Now we've compared the two. Obviously, there's key differences in terms of the production process, in terms of the time it can take. Manual is obviously revolves around a designer laying things out, whereas automation will be done by a machine very quickly. but there's some costs that are associated with this. And here's some just basic analysis that we've thrown together from some research we've done. What effectively it says is that manual against automation means that often the important thing to bear in mind is automation may have some more setup fees, and that manual costs are very linear. So the more issues you produce, the more costs there are, because every issue is being laid out manually. Whereas obviously with an automated process, depending on and these are using some of our numbers, but depending on the product you're using, it'll, if you're producing more issues or more publications, more journals, it'll go up as you're doing more and more, because there will be some licensing costs associated with it, but it'll be a lot less than the cost that would be involved in somebody sitting there and actually laying things out in a Quark Express or Adobe InDesign environment. So some key questions around production. Can you support automated content? Maybe you're not producing any kind of XML or anything that can really be used to automate things. So you're going to have to go down the manual route. It's not a bad thing. It definitely gets you to market, but something to bear in mind. Maybe you have some constraints in terms of capital expense against operational expense, which may make a difference in your choice as well. Around where you want to spend the money. If you're happy to have higher operational costs, perhaps, then maybe again manual is the way to go. Or otherwise, if you want to invest in some tech that can automate it, and you have the capital to do that, then that's definitely the way to go. How important is the format of the content? So one thing we didn't touch on is usually when you do manual page layouts, you are really only giving one font size, because you're laying out the page pixel perfect, if you like. And with automation, because you're using templates, you can actually, just like in a web browser, increase the font size. And so things like access and format and usability, if that's important to you, that may dictate the path you choose. And then again, setup costs are key. So it is really important to point out that if you do go automated, sometimes there is a raised eyebrow around some of the setup costs, because of that integration point where you really do need to understand the XML, and you understand how the templates need to look in order to represent the journal brand correctly. But once it's done, it's done, and then it can take you 10 minutes to publish an issue, which is fantastic. So it's worth pointing out that while there are some setup costs, in the long run, you're going to save some money in operating costs, which is always good. Some additional considerations that you may want to think about as you are approaching your project. First of all, it's a digital product. So are you going to want to think about analytics, and how are you going to integrate that into the app? Usually that's dictated by whatever you're using to measure web, and it probably makes sense to go with that solution. So is that supported in the product, or do you need your custom app developer to be able to integrate Google Analytics or Omniture, for example? And as you're doing that, I guess one of the things you're probably also going to want to think about are a list of metrics that you want to list, so that you can early on decide what your success factors are going to be for the app. 6 months in, you're going to want to be able to say, great, we drove those metrics that we think were important, and that might be usage or increased subscribers or whatever it is, revenue. And can you measure those things within Google Analytics? Typically, what we tend to do is you get a lot of very high-level metrics from the App Store that you're submitting your app through, in terms of both app downloads and in-app downloads for the issues, but then we within the analytics part, they can be a lot more sort of granular around the metrics that you're looking at. So how long does somebody spend on a page? How long does somebody spend within an issue? Is video being used? I'm going to all this trouble to produce extra video for my tablet edition, but is anybody ever clicking on it? Those things could be really interesting to understand. So you definitely want to take that into consideration. For some journals, advertising is important. For others, it isn't allowed. It all depends. And there's definitely a conversation around, do we want to integrate the web-based solution that we have today for our website which can be done in many cases? Or do we want to offer a way to be able to put the ads that we use in our print-based product to the tablet? And if we do we want to just offer straight kind of like flat, exact replicas of what goes into the print document? Or do we also want to offer our advertisers the ability to either themselves use page layout tools to make more interactive versions of those ads, or maybe even employ you or your design team to do that? What kind of ads do I want to offer? Do I want to do just full pages? Do I want a half page ad ability? All those things need to come in to play. And then finally, whichever method you choose in terms of multimedia support, you need to make sure you understand obviously what is available on the device. The key one is obviously Flash isn't something that's supported on the iPad. And then finally, and probably most importantly, authentication, especially for journals with their membership and with your memberships and with your potential for institutional access as well. How are you going to accommodate that? Early on, many publications, and I'll talk publications in general in this context, were offering their content for sale without any ability for existing subscribers to access it. So effectively double charging people. So you may subscribe to magazine X, but then if you want to read it on your iPad, you're going to have to pay another fee to be able to do that. And that was pushed back on very hard by users. So a lot of our applications will have some form of integration to an authentication system, such that anybody who's got a print or digital subscription for existing services can use the same credentials to log in and access the iPad version. So when thinking about that, you will need to understand whether or not you have an API that's available. You may be using a third-party vendor to provide those authentication services, and then that will need to be well understood, such that the app is able to offer that. And then for journals, institutional access is also very interesting. There are a number of ways to solve that, and that can be approached in many ways. Whether that's access just on location, or maybe you wouldn't even offer that access to institutions. It's all part of decisions that you will be wanting to make when you formulate your requirements. What I will say is that whatever path you choose, you want to make sure you have a lot of flexibility, so that your product marketing team can really be flexible around the types of packaging they offer for the types of subscriptions and products that you offer. So you may want to test the water, and you may find that you want to evolve the way that you package access. You may have like a digital subscription for web and tablet, or you may want to bundle print and tablet, or so on, or just sell things individually. Who knows? I mean, but ultimately, however you decide to progress that, the integration that you do with your authentication system needs to be flexible enough to support it. So it needs a lot of thought, and that's another thing to bear in mind. So we were planning on this session being 40 minutes, and I'm on 38 right now. So I'm just gonna check with a colleague here who's been taking note of some questions and maybe address a couple of them. So the first question, actually, let's work backwards. We've just had a question about the institutional access. So this is from Joe, and Joe's asking, so how could you further explain how institutional access may work on a tablet device? And I'll just briefly touch on that, and Joe will get back to you with an email with a bit more detail. But effectively, institutional access is normally handled via IP authentication. So it's locked down to the IP that the institution may have, the public IP they may have, so that you understand that somebody's trying to access your content from a web point of view from that IP address. So obviously tablets are portable devices, and people may want to access something from lots of different places. The simplest solution, and the one we often advocate, is that if you want to open up a the ability to authenticate against an IP address, that will obviously mean that the user will only be able to download issues, which are of course available offline, but they can only download issues while they're at that address, so connected to Wi-Fi at the institution, therefore using the institution's public IP address. Like I said, they could then download content, and because issues are available offline, they could go ahead and read them wherever they are, and that is the simplest way to employ institutional access. I'll add to that that the further workaround to that is that many institutions, if they're progressive enough and are managing their managing access from things like tablets effectively, will also have had set up VPN support on the device, so that a user can effectively connect to the institution's network, and then their public IP address again will be the same as the institution. So even if they're remote, they can, as long as they can VPN in, they would also be able to support it. So that's basically how that would work. One last question, because we're just about to go over in time, but we have a question around templates and basically what is involved in the production of those templates, and how that works in terms of automation. And this comes from Carol, who's asking effectively, how much control do we have over the template, and how is the template designed, and then how is it deployed against the XML? So think of template design, if you're going to take an automated approach, as basically, well, let me describe how we do it. Think of templates really like as though you were developing a website. So you, in a content management system, so you very much separate the layout from the content itself. So the article content will be heading content, and we'll have a number of images associated with it. And we typically work with our customers to then be able to define a template that's going to lay those things out in a way that meets their brand guidelines. So a heading will look like X, the content will be in such and such font and will be rendered to such and such pixel size. Images will be on the right hand side of the page and text float around them, and so on. And you may also within your template have something like images may be tapped and become zoomable, so that you can scale and pan around an image. And we work through that. So during the setup process of an app, which is going to be automated, we will work to decide a design, which is very much a balancing act between what assets are available, and so that we are not designing anything where you don't have an asset that's available, which could be image size, for example. And then those designs are then templated, and then the HTML transformation, the XML, sorry, transformations are applied. So it's kind of it's a bit of a partnership with our customers, at least, and that's basically how that templating works. Of course, templates can then flow different text sizes and so on. So there's a lot of power that you can put behind those things. And again, Carol, we'll get back to you with a little bit more of an explanation of that whole end-to-end process after this presentation. If you asked a question and we wasn't able to address it, I apologize. It looks like we have a number of questions to keep me busy for the rest of the day. Please feel free to continue to submit those, and we will get back to everyone. As I said, this was going to be 40 minutes, so we're just coming to the end. I hope that was a good introduction for you all in terms of an approach to being able to take your journal to tablet devices. As I said, any other questions, please let us know, and thank you again for your time. Thanks, everyone.